I'm Jasmine Moradi, and you're listening to the Queens of Tech podcast, a podcast series about raising the voice of workplace champions. 60 plus questions in around 30 to 40 minutes with women, women of color, non-binary, and transgender influencers about their journey into STEM, science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. I started the Queens of Tech podcast initiative in May 2022 because I would like to retain more women, women of color, non-binary, and transgenders in the tech industry. Talent is out there, but our work environment needs to improve for all to feel safer, stay authentic, and to be valued for our contributions. My vision is to raise the workplace ecosystem for all in tech by killing the imposter syndrome, stopping bad behavior, and increasing equity opportunities. Each podcast talk is built around 60 plus questions regarding upbringing, education, career path, DIB, and future advice. My mission is to bridge the gap between schools and workplaces by getting into the heart of my guest's personal life and career journey to inspire other girls, women of color, non-binary, and transgenders to unleash their full potential to reach top leadership roles in the tech industry. My goal is to raise the voices of tech champions around the world and together with companies, investors, and politicians, raise the challenges and opportunities around equity, inclusive, diversity, and belonging in our workplaces. Enough is enough. I would like to enforce companies to build a sustainable, inclusive culture to retain diverse talent so we keep the workforce power equity to continue building future diverse and inclusive products. Representation matters. Your voice matters. In this episode, I'm very excited to welcome my guest, Tech Queen Jennifer Moore, Chief Product Officer, Interim Product Executive, and Startup Advisor at Strategies That Spark Consulting Services, and President of the Board of Directors at Product Hive. Hi, Jennifer.
Hi, Jasmine. Nice to meet you.
It's nice to meet you too, and I'm very happy to have you joining us. How are you this evening?
Really good. Yeah, it's Saturday morning here, so it's kind of dreary. Just a lazy weekend before the crazy of U.S. Thanksgiving.
Well, let us dive into your journey into STEM to get to know you. I hope you're ready for the Queens of Tech 60 plus questions.
I am ready. I'm a little nervous, but I'm ready.
You'll be fine. So let's warm up with a few fun facts about you. How would you describe your personality in 3 hashtags?
So my 3 hashtags would be strategic visionary, infectious positivity, and then resilient AF.
How would you summarize your life in 3 sentences?
In the first 20 years of my life, I grew up in Houston, Texas, and Cleveland, Ohio, as the middle sister of 6 kids in a family raised Mormon, Latter-day Saint. The next 20 years, after moving to Salt Lake City to attend Brigham Young University, I got married right after I turned 20. I had my 2 boys 5 years apart and unexpectedly started my career in product development inside the Utah tech scene. And then the past 5 years, it's been a period of wonderful self-discovery and giving back with a lot of uncertainty in the tech job market that has made me stronger and more determined than ever to own my own destiny in the future.
And what kind of music stimulates and motivates you the most?
When I listen to music, which isn't very often, mostly just when I work out, there's 3 things that kind of matter to me when it comes to music. One is I love clever, memorable lyrics. I mean, a really good beat, something that makes me want to move, almost like an out-of-body experience. And the third thing is I put a lot of stake in like the experience that I had when I first listened to the song. So for example, if someone introduced it to me or I heard it in a really like powerful time in my life, like where it had a really big impact.
What is your personal motto?
No feeling is final. That's like the last line of a poem by Raina Maria Rilke.
What is your favorite book?
I do not have a favorite book. I would say the book that's been most impactful to me in this last year is probably the Never Search Alone by Phil Terry. That's been my favorite book that I've recommended to people all this last year.
What is your favorite podcast?
I don't listen to podcasts regularly. I'm just not an audio person. I would say my favorite audio to listen to that's kind of like a podcast, but it's just more like a series of recordings. There's an app called My Human Design by Jenna Zoe, and that is my favorite thing to listen to at the moment.
Mac or PC?
Mac, not even a question.
Say something interesting about you that most people don't know.
I own a Dalmatian. Like when people see me walking my Dalmatian, it's like, oh my gosh. Like you just don't see these breed very often, right? Like it's just something of movies. And I have a Dalmatian and we have a love hate relationship, but he's very cute.
And what is your hidden talent?
Hidden talent would be that I sing, play the piano, and I'm kind of a amateur flautist. So just kind of maybe musical talent would be a hidden talent that people might not know. When they hear me sing, they're like, whoa, you sing.
And if you were going to write a book about your life, Jennifer, what would the title be?
Goo. And the reason for that is because when I was younger and still to this day, I'm obsessed with butterflies. And I love the concept of like they cocoon and then they become like this gooey substance and then they emerge this beautiful kind of freak of nature almost. And so my life has been just a series of transformations. And so I would label it goo and it would just be a white cover with the word goo, period.
Great start. Now let us dig deeper. Our childhood has a profound effect on our adulthood. Our early experiences shape our belief about ourselves, others, and the world. So now I want to discover your childhood. Where did you grow up and how did it shape your early experiences?
I grew up in Houston, Texas. I think I was like 6 months old when my parents moved from Arizona, where I was born. And I think it shaped my early childhood because we were in a cul-de-sac in a very affluent neighborhood. And I had a small town feel in a really big city. And I think at the time when you're growing up, your world just always is going to feel so big, but it was really actually very small and secluded in this very kind of safe, loving environment. And that's what I remember of my childhood, just really good neighbors, really good friends, really good support structure. And of course, everyone complains about Houston, Texas being really hot and muggy and just needing a lot of AC. And I don't remember feeling hot and muggy ever, right? Like you don't associate those things that you would as an adult. But I think that just overall, I grew up in a really beautiful place, lots of mature trees, and it was wonderful.
And during that time or period of life, what was your dream job when you were a child?
I was going to be an author because that's what my teachers all told me that I would be. I was very good at writing and I love to read and I love the escapism of curling up with a good book. And I also love to explore different ideas and stories on paper. And so I would always write way more than what my teachers asked for, right? Like it was like a 2-page paper and I'd write 27 pages of a short story.
What was your favorite subject in school then? English?
Yeah, English is probably my favorite subject. I just loved learning. I loved achieving, and I learned my multiplication tables the fastest of everyone in the class. Like anytime there was something where there was a little bit of like competition or something was maybe challenging, I always wanted to be really good and excel. And that was, of course, driven by a lot of the expectations from my parents. I was expected to get really good grades. I was expected to do really well in school. And they created an environment where that was possible.
Well, did you have any subject that you say would be your least favorite subject there?
I really did love school. I was good at it. And I kind of like understood that there's this formula and you just follow the curriculum and you follow what the teachers say and you get an A. Like school came pretty easy to me. So the things that I struggled with as I got older in high school, for example, some of the higher ed classes were harder, like calculus and even, trigonometry and things like I struggled with a bit. So I would say I probably disliked math the most because it hurt my brain. Like the reward of figuring out a problem and solving it correctly was so thrilling, but also just didn't feel like worth the reward of getting a good grade or whatever. So I think those are the subjects that I eventually just started to dislike.
And what would you say is your earliest memory of technology and the arrival of the internet?
I remember my dad had one of those DOS computers, and I remember being in their big king bed, and we would be on the bed, like playing Frogger on this little computer. And then I remember being at sleepovers, and AOL was the big thing. The parents would go to bed, and then all of us girls would be around the computer, like probably talking to some 50-year-old pedophile. So dangerous. Like now that I think about it, right? It's like, no.
And which were the three first technology gadgets you owned yourself, and how would you say they influence your interest in tech going forward?
Nintendo, I remember getting a Game Boy. I don't remember if it was mine or we shared it. Of course, 6 kids. I think we all shared it. I remember getting my first Walkman. I would record songs off the radio. That was a big thing, right? Because it was before compact discs. So we had the cassette tapes, and I would listen to a song on the radio, and then I would be able to record it, and then I would be able to just listen to it over and over and over again. So that was the second one. What was another piece of technology? Probably when we got our first, like, cordless phone, that was a really big deal. I just remember that being like, "Oh my gosh, I can take the phone and go sneak somewhere and, like, talk to my friends," and talk to a boy, and that was a big deal, was having the freedom of no cord and being able to disappear.
And during that period of time, who was your female role model growing up, and what about her inspired you?
I remember writing a paper when I was in middle school, I think, about my paternal grandmother. She had already passed. And so my dad was telling me about her and how full of life she was. And she was very big into serving her community. So I remember her being a very stern woman, but also with a little bit of like a silly side. And so my memories of her were kind of hazy, but I remember my dad and the way he described her and wanting to be like her and just having that feeling of graciousness and elegance and gratitude and wanting to give back.
So, based on everything you said, how do you think where you grew up and the school you went to and the generation you come from influence your education and career choice?
Because I was raised LDS, Latter-day Saint or Mormon, there was no other option besides going to Brigham Young University. My parents are alumni, and I didn't apply to any other school. Just in general, my parents were very much about providing opportunities for us that they didn't have, especially my mother. She didn't have a lot of opportunities to develop talents, to have different opportunities. She didn't work. And so I think my mother was really focused on ensuring that we had a lot of opportunities to grow our talents, to be involved in things, extracurricular activities. And then my father was just really obsessed with excellence and perfectionism. And so it was just always expected that you did well, that you took school really seriously, that you took opportunities that came to you and just kind of didn't squander anything. And so for me, moving to Utah when I did, going to Brigham Young University, it's not that it was like, you have to go to BYU. It was just that was the only option. And so that's the only school I applied to. I got in, which was kind of incredible, a big risk, I would say. And then from a career choice perspective, I was raised with the understanding that you're a girl, you're a woman, you don't work, you won't work. So I was not going to work. So there was no career for me, right? Like I was just getting educated to be excellent and kind of fulfill this perfectionistic streak that both my parents had and passed on to me in a good way. And I think for me, my next step was to get married and have kids, and I was never going to work. So there was no career at that point.
Wow. Well, here you are today. So let's dig into your career. But first, I want to read two quotes. First one: how does the universe expect me to choose a career path at 16? I can't even choose what I want for dinner. Second, Abraham Lincoln said, I quote, the best way to predict your future is to create it. So, Jennifer, where and what did you then end up studying at the university?
I studied English. I loved my English teachers as we talked about in school. And so I studied English and I was going to be a high school English teacher.
Then, who and what influenced you to get in your choice of field that you're in today?
My senior year, I had a teacher. Her name was Mrs. Reed. She was infamous. There were all these like stories about her having this wall of shame of essays that people basically failed wasn't true, but everyone was like, "Oh my gosh, this teacher is really gonna put you through the ringer." And what I found was that she really was able to call out BS when she saw it, and she pushed me. And I had just kind of gone through my whole education really good at English, really good at writing. I journaled from the time I was like 6, 7 years old. And so I was just constantly writing and expressing myself through writing. And when I hit my senior year, I think that was one of the biggest influences for me because it became hard again. It was like, oh, this is next level and it's preparing me for my college education. And so when I went into English and all you're doing is reading and writing essays, that I think really prepared me and made me excited about being a similar type of teacher that was very clear about the expectations and held everyone to a really high standard.
And what professional roles have you had before that led you to start your own consulting?
I was not going to work. That was not in the cards. My husband and I had decided after I had my first baby, so this was about a year after we were married. Well, I guess 2 years total, but I had really severe undiagnosed postpartum depression. And long story short, over the course of that first year of my firstborn's life, we decided that we were going to solve postpartum depression by getting me out of the house. And the best way to do that was to work. So I started working part time as an English tutor, leveraging my English degree. Hadn't graduated yet. And then I went into technical writing, which is something that I had studied as part of my degree. And so I was a technical writer at a startup. And that kind of started my whole obsession with being part of startups. It was my first exit because we were required. So I was like really excited about the fact that you could be part of something and then get a big check at the end of it, and product development. So I really loved being part of product strategy, sitting around the boardroom table, listening to how they were developing strategy for the company, for the product roadmap, talking about our customer base. All of that was just really fascinating to me. When you're in a startup, you're really close to the leadership. I was 23, 24 years old and able to be exposed to all of this. So I went from procedures, and in my next 10 years, I was in financial services across 3 different banks. And I went from procedures and then really started thinking about kind of the systems and the inputs and outputs, how everything's interconnected. So I built on that and started doing process work. So I was a business process consultant, I think was my title. So I went from procedures to process. And then I realized, okay, if you want to really impact process, you need to have a project. And so then I moved into project management as I started to put those building blocks together and started doing change management through projects, which then led to being a program manager and managing multiple projects. And then of course, I was managing a portfolio of programs. And as I moved from procedures to process to projects to programs to portfolios, I started recognizing that I wanted to, one, be out of financial services because that is a dying industry, very slow moving, not very innovative. And then also, I wanted to be in a role that was closer to the customer. So at that point, I thought, okay, sales is too high risk, high reward. Customer service sounds exhausting. Customer success sounds exhausting. If I'm going to be close to the revenue and close to the customers, the next best thing is product management. So I moved from program portfolio management into product management back in 2013, 2014. So it's been about 10 years, and I have been a director of product management, a senior director, a VP of product strategy, and now chief product officer. So just kind of worked my way up over the last decade through all of those different roles and responsibilities. And that's how I've kind of gotten from where I started to where I am.
Very impressive. And thank you for sharing about your post trauma. And I'm sure a lot of people have been through it and will be through it. So thank you for sharing that. So, what are strategies that Spark Consulting Services do?
We are a full service consulting firm. So we do fractional and interim executive work. So I can be brought in, for example, to a company for 6 to 12 months as an interim executive. And that means that I'm fully embedded with the team. I'm full time, full kind of hiring, firing authority. and responsible for all things that a chief product officer would be responsible for embedded within the executive team. Or there's a fractional option there, which is that you're only maybe 10 to 20 hours a week for multiple companies. So I've done both over the course of the last couple of years. And then also I bring in people within my team to do things like we can do design thinking workshops. So like a design sprint for maybe a week. I've also done just one-off trainings. And then I've also just done startup advisory and consulting. So lots of variety in that, but it's been really fun and really rewarding over the last couple of years to just coming in. I call it kind of like Mary Poppins, product Poppins. I kind of come in, do my thing, and then transition to the long-term leader.
And what was the reason to come in and start your own consultancy firm instead of being hired by the company?
I have really enjoyed being more kind of a consultant, partly because when you walk in the door, you already have a set amount of credibility. There's already this understanding that you know what you're doing and they're paying good money to listen to you. As a woman in tech, it is sometimes very difficult to have that authority and credibility, especially when you walk in the door. So you're spending a lot of time politicking and earning that. And I think that for me, walking into companies knowing that they have a specific, maybe acute problem that I need to help solve, being able to solve that within a couple months to 6 months is very gratifying. And honestly, it's just kind of how I'm built to initiate things, to start things. And so I like being able to come in, assemble my team, whether that's internal or some of my external, the subcontractors that I work with as part of my firm, and then being able to solve problems quickly and not have to worry so much about internal politics and getting super engaged. It's not that I don't build relationships. It's just that it's a little bit like the grandparent version of being in corporate America. You kind of come in, you're like, let me like take care of your baby here. And then you get to leave. So that part is really fulfilling.
And what are your responsibilities and what does a typical workday or work week look like for you?
As most executives, it's meetings. I do think that meetings that are not well run are not effective use of time. That's not good. Never good to waste time or money. But I do think that as an executive, when you show up to a meeting, what you're there for is your expertise and the ability to shortcut a lot of things because you've kind of heard it all and seen it all and done it all and solved it all at that point. At this stage of my career, this is a little bit reductionist, but it's like you can kind of see interchange going on in a meeting, for example, and you can shortcut it right to like, let's get to the point, let's get to the decision. Like sometimes you need to allow people to kind of like work things out and talk things through. But there are moments, key moments that you want to step in and just say, all right, the bottom line here is X. We need a decision about this. And you kind of either like make sure there's decision authority that is clear, as in you're kind of delegating that, or you're the decider yourself and you're making decisions and helping things move forward. So when I say like, oh, it's just a typical day is you're in a lot of meetings. A typical day is really about being that multiplier and helping others move things forward and get the results faster. You're an accelerant. You're that catalyst that helps everyone else work better because you're able to shortcut those things that might take others a lot longer because they just don't have the experience. It's not that they're not smart. It's not that they're not creative or strategic. It's just that as an executive and someone who's been around the block many, many times, you've seen the movie, you know how to step into any situation, size it up quickly and go, all right, this is what we need to do. And the key is always to do that without being too harsh, domineering, shutting down, people's creative juices, if you will. And that's hard. So I would say a typical week is a lot of meetings, a lot of decision making, helping things move faster. But then a big part of being an executive as well is building those relationships and taking the time to really think through strategically how to sequence communications, how to involve the right people, how to message to different audiences. So it's a lot of that as well. It's a lot of thinking and a lot of decision making.
I love the quote, choose a job you love and you will never have to work a day in your life. So, what would you say you love the most about your role?
I love transforming culture. And culture to me is defined by the way that we collectively think and act to get things done. And so I love walking into a environment taking in a lot of input from different people, my team, stakeholders, all the way to the board of directors, and really understanding all the context. And then as a leader, working to make sure that I'm creating a better environment for people to show up as their best selves. That to me is the work of a leader, and that's the cultural transformation that you're responsible for. You have an accountability to ensure that everyone can do their best work and feel their best on a daily basis. Because the reality is, we spend the most time with the people we work with. And the reason I love being a leader, and I've led teams over 20 years now, you have such a sacred accountability to ensure that you're creating an environment, a culture that allows people to leave work and be the best for the people in their lives that actually really matter. Because as a leader, you have that ability to make someone's day horrible, and then they're going to go and visit that upon their partner, friends, children, family. And I'd rather be part of that positivity that someone can take home and be really energized and enthusiastic. I'm not perfect at it. And there are some days that you have to ruin people's day. Like that's just the reality, right? Giving feedback, maybe even like letting someone go, laying someone off. That's just the reality of being a leader. But for the most part, I love to come in and really enact that change quickly that allows for cultural transformation and for people to show up as their best, both at the office, but also at home.
And what would you say has been the best experience you've had in your current role so far? Any examples you can share with us?
For those listening that are considering consulting work, definitely the number one question I get is how do you find clients, right? And it's a lot like job seeking where you're constantly interviewing, you're constantly looking for connections and networking and ways to kind of get your foot in the door and be in the right conversations. I would say for me, the thing that I've really enjoyed has just been how easy that has felt to find new clients and new people to help support. I was nervous about that. And I think a lot of people going into consulting for the first time, it's like, how am I going to replace my whole income? And I've loved the ability to find new clients easily and then have big breaks. Like I had most of the summer off. I have the holidays off. I could not have planned this year better. I've only worked 7 months out of 12 as far as like really deep with consulting clients. And I've made more than I've ever made this year. So like that has been the best experience, which I know is going to be maybe annoying for some people to hear. I hope it's inspiring because I've found all my clients through people I already know. I haven't spent money on marketing. I haven't spent a lot of time like worrying about how to build my top of funnel. I've just made myself really available to people that have the specific need that I can help fill. And that has worked wonders. And I've worked less and felt more kind of fulfilled and rewarded this year than ever, especially from like a monetary perspective, but more so than that, just the ability to come in, quickly help people and solve problems has been the best experience.
Finding new clients and sales is very challenging for many. So, if that wasn't your challenge, what would you say is the biggest challenge you've encountered so far in the role you have, and how did you end up tackling that?
Because I'm interim and sometimes fractional, there are blind spots, I would say, right? Where you're not getting the right maybe access that you might if you were full time and everyone around you kind of felt the same level of commitment. So I think that's the challenge that you have as a consultant. You're coming in and people can still kind of treat you or act like you're an outsider. So my biggest challenge this year has definitely been bridging that gap.
And what do you wish everybody understood about your role?
That even though I am interim or fractional, I'm fully committed and I'm bought in. I have that kind of loyalty to the mission. I'm able to, again, back to like infectious positivity and building momentum. I'm able to do that even though I don't maybe have the same full time permanent role that others do. I think people have a hard time believing that that can be the case, but it is. I get really bought in and I get really passionate about what we're doing and why. And I want everyone to be successful. And I can do that even if I don't have the kind of full time benefits or whatever that others feel like constitute someone who would be like fully committed. I fully commit.
And what is the one common myth about your profession or field that you want to disapprove?
I tried to start my own business back in, I think it was like 2006 or 2007. And I was so obsessed with like my logo and making this perfect and setting this up right and the taxes and what about this? And I was kind of like doing all the ancillary things that don't actually drive revenue and make you money. And I feel like coming into this, standing up my own consulting firm, I really have done it in a more scrappy way. So I think the disprove would be just you don't have to spend a bunch of money on marketing. You don't have to spend money on someone to design a fancy website. Like all I did to even get rolling was I got a Calendly account and I put that on LinkedIn and just said, hey, my time is now worth X amount per hour. And also, if you want to hire me for these other things, I'm available. So I just started posting on LinkedIn, which is free. Calendly account is pretty minimal. And I just was way more scrappy this time around getting a business started. And I think people feel like if they spend money or they rely on someone else to like get leads for them or do their marketing or design some cool website, that they feel like they're doing something to build their business. The reality is building your business is about the relationships and like go talk to the people that you already know, make sure they know what you're up to, what you're doing, what you're offering, and come at it with a real intention of serving the people that you can actually help and ignore kind of everything else, ignore all the noise and distraction and come at it with that pure intention of being someone that, again, can solve problems, that can provide that value very quickly. And you just have to have that confidence in yourself. And that's the whole sell yourself. But it's really about approaching it from that mentality of, I can help with that. If you need this type of help, this is what I do. I'm here. I can help. And I think those doors will open without all the fanciness and all the bells and whistles that people think they need to start a business.
Then what is it that you love about working in the tech industry, especially?
Everything is so interconnected. There was a CEO that I absolutely loved at a company many years ago, and he would always talk about how, as a technology business, we are all operating in a suboptimal way. And what that means is that if sales just tries to optimize just for sales, if product just optimizes for building new products and getting them out the door, if customer success just optimizes for retention, like if everyone just kind of optimizes for their own areas, we're never going to be successful. So we actually have to operate less optimally than we would if we were just kind of like doing our own thing. And so I love the interconnectedness and the seam work that that requires. Because again, back to my early career, this idea of systems thinking, there's always an input and always an output to everything you do. And if you truly understand that, you get really curious about what's happening over here in marketing, what's happening over here in biz dev. How are we doing over here on the operations side of the house? Like you're never just thinking about your own little world. And it just makes it all that much more rich and fulfilling to work in a very interconnected way because we're all dependent on each other for success. That's why I love technology.
And Oprah Winfrey said, I quote, think like a queen. A queen is not afraid to fail. Failure is not a stepping stone to greatness. So, Jennifer, what would you say has been the biggest achievement in your career?
It is really difficult to put into words how ingrained it was in me, whether it was intentional or something I just kind of picked up culturally from a religious perspective. You didn't work. Like women didn't work. My mother didn't work. My grandmother didn't work. You didn't earn money outside of the home. In 2024, it's hard to grasp that. But back in like 1999, 2000, when I was getting started, when I was getting married and kind of thinking through what my life would be like, there was literally no question that like now that I'm married, this is it. This is my life. I have babies and this is all I'm going to do. So the biggest achievement for me was that mental, emotional, spiritual journey that I had to go on to actually accept that working was okay, that I was going to have a career, that I was going to be good at it. And that just kind of started me in this path where I was like, you know what? If I'm going to work, I'm going all the way to the top. There's no world in which I don't go to the C-suite and become an executive and make lots of money if this is what my purpose is and this is what I'm going to do. And so that shift was so massive. It's hard to put into words because it was so black and white when I got started. I was never going to work. That was never, ever, ever going to be something that I did. And so, again, the journey to actually get to that point is one of the most significant inflection points in my entire life. So I think my biggest achievement is the fact that I even got mentally to the place where I was like, it's okay to work outside the home.
And what would you say has been the biggest factors help you become successful? Like, what are your success habits?
I think it's that resilience. The success habit I would say that's most impacted me is this ability to be in the low lows and recognize, again, from a life motto perspective, no feeling is final. That includes the high highs and not resting on your laurels and thinking, oh, I've made it. There's no like, I made it moment, really. It's all just about the leveling up that is constant. And that happens across all the different vectors of your life, whether that's in the manifestation of your physical environment, like a home or some geography that you want to live in, versus something that's maybe on the mental, spiritual, emotional. There's so many aspects of that. For me, I spent most of my 20s focused on mental health. And then in my 30s was really forced into focusing on my physical health. And I think my 40s is kind of like bringing the two together. In practicality, that level of resilience that you have to just keep going into the low lows, having disappointments and things that really wear you down and exhaust you to a certain extent, and then being able to pick yourself back up out of that. And so the habits that are part of that is just that I've constantly been a student of mental health, physical health, and the bridging of those two, and always learning what else is out there to help guide me on that journey. And so I think it's like that endless curiosity and also the humility to know that you don't have all the answers and that's okay. So I think that's the biggest thing for me is just be resilient and being able to move through things in your life that are really hard, not accepting that this is it and this is like the final form of something. It's never the final. No feeling is final. No situation is final. No moment in your life defines you.
And how do you measure your performance knowing that you're successful or not?
I feel high energy about the kind of interchanges that I'm having, so to speak, then I feel like I'm being successful. It's about tuning into my energy and the energy exchanges that I'm having all day long. When I start to feel like things are kind of breaking down or I'm not feeling that high energy and that high desire to build momentum towards the next thing or think through something strategically, I start to recognize that, like, all right, this is ending, or I need to make some type of like major shift. And sometimes that happens like externally to me. And sometimes I'm the one, enacting that change. So success to me is about measuring my energy and whether I feel like I have a high energy and really solid energy exchanges with others. When those start to deteriorate, or I feel like I'm getting lower in energy, that's a signal to me that something's out of whack and I need to work on that. And I'm not being as successful as I could be.
And with success comes failures. So, what would you say your biggest failure in your career and what did you learn from it?
Early in my career, I was leading a pretty significant project and we had over engineered the whole thing, to be honest. There were maybe 8 to 10 of us sitting in a room. And I remember the moment that the VP of that area of the bank came into the conference room and just kind of summarily said, this project has been canceled, stop all work. And it was devastating because I was like, oh my gosh, we've been working at this for weeks and weeks. And I thought this was really important and I thought we were on the right track. And it just felt like we were getting all this positive feedback and it really came out of nowhere. And I think recognizing that something that felt like it was just inevitable could end so suddenly really did give me that better understanding of the non-permanence of building something towards what feels like it's going to be the success. Like we're doing something meaningful. And then the fact that someone higher up can come in and just kind of say, like, stop everything. What you're doing is no longer of value. That was a big moment for me because it was devastating, but also I just learned how quickly things can turn and not to get too attached to anything.
And what would you say it inspired motivate you the most in your role and career right now?
We have spent the last 4 years building, architecting, and designing our dream home. And I would say keeping this lifestyle, keeping this dream home at the moment is the thing that's motivating me the most because it is really wonderful. And my kids have had a lot of instability over the last 4 or 5 years, both in where we've lived, but also, my job and just kind of the ebbs and flows of how volatile tech has been and with COVID and everything. And so right now I am most motivated by providing that stability of this dream home and dream life that I've created.
Let us now jump into the influence of mentors, role models, champions, and sponsors. For our listeners, role models can consciously or subconsciously be a powerful force in our lives. In addition, champions can stand up and advocate for us and open up the world of possibilities. Sponsors match emerging talent with leaders and influential employees who can help us move ahead in our careers. So, Jennifer, do you have a mentor, champion, or a sponsor today?
Honestly, my biggest champion at the moment is my husband because we have to be co-sponsors of each other. He has a small business that he runs and is continually trying to grow and find new ways to reach new audiences. And then I'm kind of on the other side building my business. So I feel like we have to support each other. And when he's having a hard day, I try to be there for him. When I'm having a hard day, he's there for me.
And history shows that it's been more common for men having mentor champions and sponsor in business than women. So, how important do you think is to have a mentor champion and sponsor through one's career?
Definitely important. I would also say, though, that the inner foundation that you build yourself is the most important. No one person is going to make that big of a difference in your career. Like, you can't predict that. And so I always tell people just make sure that you're staying connected with important people. So that might mean your direct manager, it might mean someone else who's taken an interest in you. Again, with that energy exchange that I try to stay tuned into, you can tell when an executive, i.e., a very important person, takes an interest in you because they'll give you additional time. They're willing to stay after a meeting and answer questions. They're willing to engage with you on a project. They're willing to stand up for maybe an opinion that you shared in a meeting. They're willing to co sign on that. So pay attention to those types of people in your circle that are already there because you having a strong inner foundation, being the best version of yourself you can be, you're going to naturally attract people that are like, wow, this person has a lot of potential. This person is providing a lot of value. And you'll get little hints that they're interested in you. And then you know that you can go to them and ask them for support, ask them for advice, get questions answered, etc. So I would just caution people not to be too concerned about picking like this one person who's going to have so much influence on your career and just always be someone that's attracting the right attention, basically, of people who can make a difference. And those are always going to be people who are just that bit further ahead or maybe a lot further ahead of you in your career. So create those relationships. That's the most important thing, in my opinion.
Let's move on to leadership. Before that, Adena Friedman, President and CEO of Nasdaq, said, I quote, empowering those around you to be heard and valued makes a difference between a leader who simply instructs and one who inspires. And Shirley Sandberg, ex-CEO of Facebook, said, I quote, leadership is about making others better as a result of your presence and making sure that the impact lasts in your absence. So, Jennifer, what does leadership mean to you?
I love that quote by Sheryl Sandberg. And I think I kind of expressed that previously around creating the right culture for people to show up as their best selves. And that is about how they show up at work, but more importantly, how they show up in their personal life, because it all bleeds together, especially nowadays. I'd say leadership to me means being the person who is willing to go out ahead of others and kind of show the way and paint the vision for a better future, whether that's a product, whether that's a new strategy with new investment decisions, whether that's a path to, an exit, for example. But your responsibility as a leader is to always paint the picture of a different and better future and make it possible to get there. Make people feel like they can be a part of that and that it's achievable.
And what distinguish, according to you, a good leader from a bad leader?
I've always maintained that you can learn more from a bad leader in some ways than you can a good leader. So I think the thing that distinguishes a good leader from a bad leader is pretty personal to the individual and like the journey that you're on, what you need to be learning. And so I would just say, rather than say like this is specifically a good versus a bad leader. I think it's a lot about what you personally need. And so if the leader isn't giving you what you need in the moment, then that is maybe not as effective a leader for you at that moment in time. And what I mean by that is you could say generically, a good leader is someone who doesn't micromanage. And a bad leader is someone who is in your business and giving you a lot of like nitty gritty feedback and, just so obsessed with like all the details. The reality is there may be a leader out there that is considered by some a micromanager, but in that moment in your career, you actually need to learn those details. And you love that someone is spending that much time engaged with you and willing to read everything that you put together and mark it all up and really like get into the details with you and give you that level of engagement and that time. And so it's a little bit like, how are you writing your own story? And so I think number one, like I said, you can learn maybe more from a quote unquote bad leader sometimes than a good leader, as in what not to do. But also, it's in the eye of the beholder. The most effective leader for you is the person who's going to help you learn and grow from the point that you're at, wherever that next thing is that you need. And you know that you have maybe a less effective leader when you feel like you're not learning. And again, that could be just learning from what not to do. So just stay open and don't be too judgmental about putting people in boxes of like, this is a good leader, this is a bad leader. I think it's very gray and I think it's very individual.
How would you describe yourself as a leader?
The way I always describe myself is I am a transformational pace setter. The way those two go together is transformational, meaning I am very passionate and kind of focused on if we're not improving and we're not moving forward, then we're falling behind. There is no kind of stasis, middle ground where it's like, oh, we're just kind of here and we're doing our thing. And so I am constantly pushing for what can we do differently? What can we do better? How can we change and improve? I'm always looking for something to transform. The second half of that is as a pace setter, I like to work with my teams to set the pace. And that means I lead from the front. I'm never going to ask my teams to do something that I am not currently doing myself or am willing to do. And so I tend to be someone that goes at a pretty solid clip. And I do care and want to calibrate with my team to understand if I'm going too fast for them. But at the same time, it's kind of like when you watch an orchestra. If you really watch a lot of conductors, they're just slightly ahead. They're keeping the beat, especially with like a congregation, for example, like at a church, you watch like the actual music conductor, they're always just slightly ahead of the masses of voices that they're not quite there. There's a disconnect in the visual versus the audio. And so for me, it's about being that couple steps ahead because I'm kind of like going, hey, come on, guys, like we're going this way. Right. And so you have to be out in front to be that pace setter.
And as a leader, what values do you prioritize the most?
Bias to action, honesty, transparency, and the ability to change.
You mentioned earlier about, you can learn from bad leaders. So what leadership lessons have you learned that have shaped you into the leader you are today?
One of the lessons that I learned early on was the idea that you can just show up as a leader and give feedback and help your team member calibrate their performance once a year. That is probably one of the biggest lessons I learned. So I had this leader who was kind of absentee, honestly. She was remote compared to everyone else in the office. And I just felt like a lot of the decisions that were made weren't really based on real information. And it was just difficult. And so we got to the performance review and we were in person. She had flown in. And it's kind of at the end, she's like, well, you've done really good work this year, but the executive team just feels like you need to get over yourself. And I was just like, I don't really know what that means. It's hurtful. I know that. So I feel like for me, the biggest leadership lessons that I've had are around how to provide feedback in a timely, actionable, specific way that doesn't focus on, things that people generally can't change, like their personality. So I think that has been one of the biggest things. The other one that I'll mention, another story, this was many years ago. I had a team member who suffered from health issues. and wasn't on FMLA, wasn't on any type of protective, leave or anything. But I really struggled to talk to that person about their absenteeism and how the fact that they were in and out a lot or things were unpredictable was affecting their work. So we were kind of in the middle of this. And right as that was happening, I got a call one day from one of the coworkers at the bank, and the person had killed themselves. And it was probably one of the most impactful things that I've ever experienced as a leader. It turns out that it was something that had been an issue and mental health challenges for a long time, multiple attempts. And so in the moment, I felt like I could have done this differently. And, you kind of play out these things like, oh, could I have affected this outcome differently? And obviously, you cannot in those situations. So it was really tragic. It was really hard to go through as a human, but also as a leader. And so I would say, just in general, that has impacted me because it goes back to how you're interacting with people on a daily basis and just kind of erring on the side of mercy in a lot of ways, where you want to avoid getting to a place where you're giving someone harsh feedback or negative feedback all kind of in one fell swoop. That was kind of my first experience. But then this other one, it really just taught me that you never know what someone is struggling with underneath it all. You obviously don't have control over that. And so, in a lot of ways, I would just say try to make other people's journeys as positive as possible. It's not always, your job as a leader to make everything all beautiful rainbows and ponies or anything, but I would just say err on the side of mercy.
Thank you for sharing that, thinking about the family and what you had to go through. Thank you for that. So, what are your three strengths and three weaknesses?
My top three strengths are strategic, which means that I'm really good at creating alternative ways to approach things. I'm always playing a chess game. Individualization, which is about being really good at looking at the unique qualities of individual people and also figuring out how different people can work together the most effectively. The third one is arranger, and that just means that I'm really good at organizing people because I understand what people can have that kind of complements each other. And then the fact that I can put all of the pieces and people together to, again, enhance overall like productivity and our ability to achieve things together. My three weaknesses are consistency in strength finders, like the Gallup Clifton strengths finders. Consistency is about being aware of the need to treat people the same. And that is kind of at odds with my individualization, where I'm like, everyone should kind of be treated differently. Consistency is also something where people crave like routine and knowing that things are like the same. I'm all about variety. The other weakness is harmony. So looking for consensus, people that like harmony don't enjoy conflict. They seek areas of agreement. I am someone who likes conflict if it gets us to a better result. And I don't like it when there's just like a bunch of consensus. I like to have maybe like one person responsible ultimately for a decision or a clear path to making progress. The third weakness is deliberative. And people that are deliberative are best described by the serious care they take in making decisions or choices. They can anticipate obstacles. I am not deliberate in the way I operate. I'm very strategic in the way that I put together all the pieces and I make decisions very quickly.
Let us now jump into the hottest topic in business today: workplace culture, unlocking the power of diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. And you have mentioned to us the importance of culture. So, what do diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging mean to you personally, Jennifer?
I think it goes all back to that energy piece that I was talking about earlier, where I feel like if you have a culture that is diverse, equitable, inclusive, and people feel like they belong, you're going to elevate the energy of everyone around you. And that's going to help everyone just show up as their best. And I don't believe in like, bring your whole self to work and, like we accept everything. Because the reality is, every culture has norms and practices and things that they will accept or won't accept. And you have to determine yourself if that's going to work for you. But I do think that if you feel like you are in a place where those things are true, you're going to feel your own energy level elevated and you're going to feel that desire to like show up as your best every day.
And what do you consider being 3 to 5 signs of good company culture if you were ever to join a company tomorrow?
The signs of a good culture are similar to the things that I value as a leader: bias to action, transparency, honesty, the ability to be candid with one another, and the ability to change, to examine things that aren't working and make changes quickly.
And as a woman, what would you say has been the most significant political or cultural barrier in your career, and how have you overcome these challenges?
Think being underestimated. I remember, for example, there was an executive that I reported to, and everyone else who reported to this person was male. And there was a big project, like really visible, critical to our strategy and our future as a company. And I remember saying in a meeting with all of these men, I should lead this initiative. And I kind of stuck my neck out. And I remember the whole room just kind of being silent, like, why would you be the one to do this? And it wasn't even maybe something that crossed people's minds. And I just remember thinking it already falls under my kind of like purview, basically. It was already part of my responsibility. And so it was just like, why wouldn't I lead this? But because it was so big and visible, it was a question on the table, right? So I think that's the biggest thing that's been challenging is feeling like I'm just constantly being underestimated and knowing that I can take things on and do more and feeling like I'm not always like given those opportunities, that I kind of have to vie for those opportunities. So when I'm underestimated, I feel like the biggest answer to that is always to show, not tell. So I've always worked then to take on projects and advocate for myself, take those projects on and then really crush it and be very committed to excelling at that. And I know that's a hard answer because it's like unfair and it's frustrating and it's just annoying sometimes that as women and other underrepresented groups that we feel like we have to both fight for getting the opportunity, but also fight to keep the opportunity. But I do think that you shut your detractors down by just being really good at what you do and getting results.
And coming in as a consultant, then you have a distance to the culture and the political games. But how do you discuss the IB challenges such as salary gaps, promotion, or maternity leave with your colleagues, peers, and community?
I think that the number one thing is data. You got to bring the data. And so when we talk about things like salary gaps, like as an example, I was at a company and I was leading a team of product managers. We put everyone's salaries up in a spreadsheet. We projected those and we looked at everyone on my team across, 8 product managers. And it was very clear that there was a pretty significant gap of almost $15,000 in pay from what the male product managers had asked for and the 1 or 2 females on the team at that time. And so I was really impressed because the executive at the time that I reported to, he just said, go to HR and make that change right now, increase her salary by $15,000.
Wow.
And but it was just so clear because we didn't have ranges and we didn't have like a lot of things on the front end when we were recruiting and hiring. And so it really came down to we have this range, but what did they ask for? And of course, the female had asked for a lot less. And so over time, it was like she'd been there for maybe 6 months. And it was like, wow, now that we see these all up against all together, it's really clear that there's this big salary gap. And so I think you do that, but then on a macro, like across the whole company, you need to be looking at these numbers and really discussing them with the data. So DEIB, a rising tide lifts all boats, it influences and helps everyone.
And today, tech companies invest heavily in marketing, attracting women of color, non-binary, and transgender individuals, but struggling to retain them. Articles show women are leaving the tech industry. However, this is a problem. So what is your best strategies on how companies can work to build a stronger corporate culture that engages DIB?
I think first and foremost, it has to be a conversation, right? Like you have to recognize that there are underrepresented groups. There are groups that are having a more difficult time advocating for themselves and make the forums available to people to talk about that. Whether that's an ERG, an employee resource group, like, women at this company or Pride or Mosaic, or, there's these other groups that really celebrate the diversity. And so I think creating the right forums is the first step because you're aware that you have a challenge here. And then ask the people, what is needed? What are you struggling with? What can we do differently? What can we do better? And that goes back to a strong culture of change and the ability to examine what's working and what's not working. And then, of course, at that point, once you have the information, you have the data, it's just like product management, right? Like you gather the information of what are the user needs. Then you have to actually prioritize those and make the changes. And once you do that, I think it's important to have those communication loops where you're actually communicating back to those groups and those communities to make sure they understand what is actually being done, like what the impact has been, so that you can have that full circle. So at the corporate level, to make it a focus, you actually have to put the time and effort in and potentially, budget to make that a really important focus. And it can't just be lip service. Like, we believe in diversity and there's this thing on our website. It's like the actual people have to have a place to gather, discuss issues, and create solutions that are then sponsored and championed by people who can actually do something about it, that have the budget, that have the influence and power.
And that is great advice, Jennifer. But what would you say are the key challenges of implementing a BIB culture in a workplace and in the tech industry today?
The challenge is that we don't actually put the budget behind what we give lip service to. And those budgets, as we know, come all the way from the board, the executive team. So there's so much data out there that talks about how more diverse companies are more successful. And so I think the key challenge in implementing is always going to be the lack of focus, right? Where there's so many things vying for attention and budget and everything. So you have to make it a priority, and that has to come from the top down.
And why do you think it's important for more women, women of color, non-binary, and transgender to join the tech industry today?
Because our user base is just as diverse. You cannot build product and you cannot sell and market and support the customer base that you don't understand, that you don't have kind of inherent empathy.
And how important is it to have women, not just as leaders, because normally they end up in the middle management, but actually higher representation at C-suite level and boardrooms with a voice?
Ruth Bader Ginsburg said that women should be in all the rooms where decisions are being made. So if you have women and other underrepresented groups, non-binary, transgender, et cetera, if you have those groups in your company, they deserve to have representation and a seat at the table where those decisions are being made. So that's what the benefit is again, similar to how your company is structured, the makeup of your company, and then who you end up serving. Those two need to be better mirrors of each other. It's a similar thing when it goes from the quote unquote bottom to the top. You need to continue to have that representation at the top.
However, why do you think is the main reason we still see few women, women of color, non-binary, and transgender leaders in tech leadership roles and as startup founders still today?
It starts with the inequity of who gets promoted into those leadership roles, where you have that broken rung and the inability for those who are in these less represented groups to have the opportunity. And I think some of it comes down to this inherent, research has shown this, right? There's this inherent bias where you promote men based on their potential, and the commonality bias of this person looks and sounds and acts like me, where you have men promoted for that reason, for potential. Women are promoted based on what they've proven. So it's a lot harder for women to get that opportunity to move up in ranks. And I think that broken rung continues to be the biggest challenge that we have.
And you've been speaking a lot about the importance of data, and data reveals the concerning trend of low funding rates for startups led by women, with only 1 to 2% of the funding directed towards women in the tech industry. Latina and Black women, in particular, receive less than 1%. What factors do you believe contribute to this imbalance, and what strategies can be activated to increase funding for women led startups?
I'll speak a little bit of just like the Utah tech scene. It all kind of feeds each other, where you have men who are more likely to get promoted, who are more likely to have the opportunities to have big exits, where in the tech industry, they're making the big bucks, hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars in these exits, because they've had that opportunity to move up in those ranks or have a chance taken on them as maybe like a co-founder or part of a founding team. It's a system that perpetuates itself because then those men who now have millions of dollars at their disposal turn around and they're wanting to invest. And they go to invest in people that act, look, and feel like them. So I think it really does come down to breaking that pattern by having forums and groups and the ability for women to get more involved. Like, for example, I'm part of an angel investing group that has really taken great pains to ensure that our community of investors is highly diverse and attracting more people by helping us understand how this type of angel investing works and de-risking it as much as possible. So I think we need more groups like that that invite very specifically, like literally, I'm inviting you to be a part of this and help make these decisions and break the cycle of men who get promoted, make a lot of money, and then turn around and invest in more men who get the opportunities and get all the money, right? So we need more representation in the investor community to allow us to break that cycle.
And how much do you think the tech industry has changed regarding DIB since you joined?
Oh, hugely. I could tell you horror stories for hours of what I experienced when I first joined tech 20 some years ago. The types of behaviors and things that were just swept under the rug are so much different now because I think of these DEIB initiatives and the budget that's been put behind it and the focus that it's had. I think that it has shifted significantly in a positive way where the types of behaviors, challenges, and everything that I experienced, especially the first decade of my career, they're just not as acceptable. So let me just give you an example real quick. In my first job, when I went to my leader and basically said, I'm being harassed, like sexually harassed, I was accused at that point of throwing my male coworkers under the bus and basically being told that I was making it up. And I quit that job because of that. But like, I can't imagine that that would be an acceptable response today. I'm not saying stuff still doesn't happen just because we have more diversity and more, there's definitely a lot of room for improvement, but there's just less possibility of those things happening and being swept under the rug when you have a more diverse culture and leadership.
So, looking back on your career, what one thing would you have changed in your work environment to break the bias?
If I could change one thing in my early career, on the one hand, yes, it would have been nice to have an HR leader to go to at this startup that I was at because we didn't have an HR leader, but it would be nice to have more women in leadership. However, I think the bigger thing for me would have just been to have better mentorship and women talking about these things with each other. And so I didn't have anyone that I felt like I could just go to and say, hey, this is the thing that's happening. I stayed silent for a long time. I didn't speak up until there were many instances that really made me uncomfortable and feel unsafe. And so it would have been better to have more women who are maybe further in their career actually willing to have those conversations, kind of be more open about their experiences together. I was very alone. There were not many women. There were like maybe a handful of women at this company, and it was like 200 people. And it felt very competitive. And so I think breaking the bias would have started with women supporting each other more.
And looking forward, what actions will you take as a leader then to reduce bias and improve the IB for the next generation in tech?
When we are hiring, I am constantly looking at the people that we're bringing in and whether or not we're creating a culture that is diverse. As a leader, I encourage my hiring managers, especially if we're hiring entry level, to ensure that they're hiring in a diverse way. Like I tell them, I don't want to see a bunch of like white male candidates from these types of schools, right? I want to see candidates. There's like a diverse range of people that we're hiring. And especially for entry level, you have the opportunity to give someone a chance that wouldn't normally have a chance, right? That might be passed over. And I feel like that's where it starts. Like it starts with hiring and who you're bringing in the door.
Let us move on to another hot topic in business today, which is work life balance and mental health. Jennifer, you have undoubtedly a busy lifestyle. How do you take care of yourself to maintain good mental health?
The number one thing is sleep. You can't stress that enough. You have to prioritize the rest part of mental health. And if you're not sleeping, nothing else matters. Nothing else is going to come into play. You're not going to feel like eating well. You're not going to feel like moving your body. You're not going to show up well in your relationship. So I think for me, I had to really prioritize this once I had hit a pretty rock bottom burnout in 2015. It took me a year to really recover from that. And I learned a lot of techniques around self-care and mostly just that it takes time. Like, for example, my doctor said to me, you need to pick 2 detox activities to do every day, and you're going to do them for the rest of your life. So, in addition to sleep, I also spend a lot of time just detoxing. And some of them are really simple, right? Like, I own an infrared sauna, which is awesome. So, I get in the infrared sauna often. I do skin brushing. I do packs for your liver, like just different things like that that I found that work over time. And I really feel it when I don't spend that time on self-care. So I think between sleep and detoxing, those are the things that have been really, really impactful for me to take care of myself, but then that translates to strong mental health.
And what is your advice on how companies can create a more mentally healthy workplace in the new now?
I think it has to be top down where managers and leaders, executives, they're taking care of themselves through things like leaving the office on time or shutting down at a decent time. Really, those kind of boundaries that you can set for yourself. And then also the fact that you need to step away and take that time off and really be disconnected. So I think it starts there, and that helps others in the company feel like they have quote unquote permission, even if it's written that like, "Yo, we have unlimited PTO," or "You have this much time off to take." Unless they actually see that culturally it's acceptable to do that, people will not honor that for themselves.
And what would you say motivates you every day to get out of bed?
I am very motivated by having like an appointment, right? So something that someone expects something of me, the fact that I have someone waiting on a Zoom or, a meeting that I have to get to or an appointment that I have to drive to, that helps me just hop out of bed. Otherwise, I tend to maybe just stay in bed for hours and hours reading. The other day, I actually finished a book. I stayed in bed for 8 hours straight once I woke up, and I read a book. I will say one other thing. I learned long ago that I really, really hate alarm clocks. I do not like being interrupted in the middle of a REM cycle. So I have not woken up to an alarm for 15 years or more. I just stopped. And the way I can do that is that I go to bed at a good time. And I know my body clock well enough that I know that I will, wake up on time if I have something. So I just think if you want to be like a morning person, anyone can be more of a morning person if they want to be, but it starts at night. So I have just found that waking up to an alarm puts me in the worst mood when I wake up. And I like to wake up to when my body is ready.
Now, let us wrap up with a few words of wisdom and a piece of advice for our listeners. Jennifer, what is the best piece of advice you've been given that has helped you during setbacks in your role and career?
I actually have this on my desk. It's a big pink eraser and it says 4 big mistakes. The best piece of advice that I've ever received is there are no mistakes. You make the best decisions at the time with the information you have. And for me, that was such a huge shift in my mental state of feeling like the penance thing, right? Like you make a mistake and you have to pay for it somehow, or you have to feel really bad about it in order for it to like somehow be rectified. Get rid of that and just think like there are no mistakes. You made the best decision with the context and information that you had at the time. Because the reason we judge ourselves so harshly for mistakes is because we're smarter in the moment that we are making that judgment. We can look back on something and go, wow, that was I really effed that up. And if you really think back to it and kind of reverse engineer the moment in time you made that decision or, said that thing out loud that you shouldn't have said or something, there was purpose behind it. Even if the outcome wasn't what you wanted at the time, there are no mistakes.
And is there something you wish you would have known or a skill you wish you had when starting out in the tech industry?
I think I would have liked to lean on more mentors and just people who had maybe like gone before. I started my career, internet was just kind of coming into its own, and I didn't even have a cell phone when I first started working. That's how like long ago I started working. And so there wasn't access to the information like there is today, both from a people perspective, because this is pre-Facebook, pre-LinkedIn. There wasn't a lot of opportunity to really like build stronger connections and talk to people who had gone before. So you were very much isolated. And so much of my advice that I got was from my direct family members, my husband, my father-in-law, my dad, my mom, my sister. Like, I just don't remember having a lot of opportunities to really talk to other people. So I think that skill of reaching out and being able to talk to people, have mentors, and just learn from others who have gone before and made the same mistakes that you're about to make. I think that is kind of the skill that I wish I would have had.
And if you had the ability to go back in time to when you were just the beginning of your career, what advice would you have given to your younger self?
It's all going to be okay. Like everything will work out and you'll get exactly what you wanted.
And what advice will you give to young girls, women, women of color, non-binary, and transgenders who are trying to break into STEM fields today, especially wanting to become next generation leaders and founders?
Find the people who have gone before, like find the guides. I think the thing that I wished I had when I started out, I think young people today are very adept at this and very good at it. And they have so many resources and tools to be able to find the people, but also just the information. So keep learning, never stop educating yourself and asking questions and being curious. And then also be relentless about finding the right guides who will help you forge the best path and allow you room to grow and learn and kind of, you might have some missteps, but have those people around you that are that really strong support structure. Because people like me who are 20 plus years into our career, we really do want to give back at this point. Like that's something that becomes very core to who you are. It's like, I've been there, done that. And I want to save other people pain and heartache and time wasted.
And last but not least, Jennifer, what is next for you in your role and career in tech? What are your career aspirations?
I really enjoy keynote speaking and just public speaking in general. So for me, I really hope there's more opportunities to get on stage and share some of my stories and failures and successes with others. And then also just growing my consulting business, helping companies with their product and operational needs and meeting more awesome people. So yeah. And then of course I still run a nonprofit and I have ideas for, other companies that I want to start and other nonprofits that I might establish here in the future. And then also I'm writing a book and I am, yeah, just excited for honestly a lot of free time because as of this year, I'm an empty nester, which is kind of crazy. Most of my kids are in college and I'm ready for whatever the universe has to offer.
Amazing. I look forward to all of that. So thank you very much, Jennifer, for being a guest on the Queens of Tech podcast. Sharing your journey will without a doubt inspire change and reshape company culture for the next generation of women, women of color, non-binary and transgender leaders and founders in tech.
Thank you so much for having me. This has been a wonderful experience. Thank you, Jasmine.
Thank you for listening. For more podcast episodes and to learn more about the Queens of Tech initiative and to support us, visit queensof.tech.